The beginning started one summer day when Josh was home alone with nothing to do. He had no nearby friends and couldn't get to the mall without being driven. Small in stature like his mom, he'd inherited her genetic characteristics. They were approximately the same size, and he seemed to have stopped growing. His father had died years ago in an accident, leaving insurance money and investments that allowed them to live comfortably. His mother, Elizabeth, an advertising executive, chose to continue working to stay active and involved. Wandering the house looking for something to do, Josh found the laundry basket outside the laundry room filled with clean clothes. His clothes were neatly folded on top. Thinking he'd help his mom, he started putting them away. As he lifted his things, his eyes fell upon a soft emerald green slip covered in lace. Instinctively drawn to it, he reached out and touched the satin garment. A strange, electrifying sensation surged through him, one he'd never experienced before. Quickly, Josh broke contact and stepped away from the basket, unsure what to make of this feeling. He went to put his things away, thinking he'd forget about touching the slip. But once finished, he was drawn back to the laundry basket. He gazed longingly at the slip, as if it were calling to him. Moving from his trance-like state, he reached down and picked up the slip by its straps, letting it unfold. Beneath it lay the matching satin bra, panties, and garter belt. Quickly gathering the lingerie, he stood there feeling the smooth satin against his hands and arms. Instinctively, he knew he had to try on these items. He retreated to his room and quickly undressed, figuring he could hook the bra in front, then slide it around and put the straps over his arms. He trembled with excitement as he put the garter belt around his waist. He stepped into the silky panties and drew them up his legs. Once he had the panties and slip on, he wanted to see himself in the full-length mirror in his mom's room. Entering her room, he noticed stockings lying on the dresser. Josh picked them up, feeling their softness before sitting on the bed to put them on. He had observed his mom putting on stockings many times when passing her slightly open door. Now he did exactly as he'd seen her do. Carefully, he slid one stocking over his foot and up his leg, properly attaching the top to the garter tabs. Once secure, he repeated the process and stood to look at his reflection. He could feel the stockings pulling against the garters as he stood. With his longish hair and slight frame, Josh felt he was looking at a teenage girl in the mirror instead of himself. His one disappointment was that the bra hung limp over his chest. Quickly, he went to the dresser looking for panties to fill the bra cups. He took several silky pairs and placed them in his bra, loving how it made him look like he had breasts. He sat at his mom's vanity and brushed his hair until it looked more feminine. Looking at his reflection again, he liked what he saw. From the enhanced breasts to the lingerie to his hairstyle. Briefly turning away, he looked in his mom's closet, searching through blouses and skirts until he found the gold satin cocktail dress she wore on special occasions. He took it from the closet and removed it from its hanger. The feel of the satin increased his excitement. Carefully, he slid the dress over his head and put his arms into the short sleeves. He settled it over his body and struggled to zip up the back. Josh couldn't have imagined how nice it would feel wearing his mom's satin things. Before moving from the closet, he saw the gold 3-inch heels that went with the dress. He picked them up, moved to the bed, and sat down to put them on, sweeping the skirt under him, as he'd seen his mom do. He slid his foot into the pointed toe pump and was pleased it fit perfectly. Once both heels were on, Josh made sure he was used to the feeling before trying to stand. When he finally stood, he was wobbly but managed to hold onto the dresser until he could stand easily and start walking. He looked in the mirror again and observed his image. He knew he felt good dressed like this, and his reflection confirmed he looked good. He wanted to apply makeup, but knew his inexperience could be his undoing. He decided to savor the feel of the satin against his body rather than try to be fully feminine all at once. Josh stayed dressed for almost 2 hours that first time. He moved to his room while dressed and began searching the web for information about men who liked to wear dresses. He found story sites, articles, and sites about petticoat punishment. He even found a chat room where males who enjoyed wearing women's things could meet. Although underage, he decided to go in and learn. When asked for his screen name, he thought briefly, then entered Janet. Josh decided right then that when dressed, he would become Janet. He entered and chatted with others who seemed to share his newfound passion. Realizing how late it was getting, he quickly signed off. He didn't want his mom to catch him. He removed her things and dressed in his normal clothes, trying to replace everything as it had been. Of course, he couldn't do it exactly. Later that day, his mom noticed the ill-folded lingerie, her panties drawer in disarray, and her cocktail dress slightly askew on the hanger. Though she had her suspicions, she said nothing to Josh. However, Elizabeth began regularly leaving 1 or 2 pieces of lingerie on her dresser and a dress hanging on her bedroom door to see what would happen. For the next few weeks, Josh was a regular visitor to his mom's room. He would select lingerie and a dress to wear, sometimes choosing what his mom had intentionally set out, though not realizing she'd done it purposefully. He would then go to his computer, read stories, and wind up in the chat room. He discovered that those who enjoyed women's apparel ranged from simple crossdressers like himself to those fully transformed by a wife, girlfriend, or mistress. After each computer session, he would reluctantly change clothes and try to put everything back as he'd found it. Usually, there was a slight difference that Elizabeth could and did detect. One day, before leaving for work, Elizabeth left a white satin ankle-length nightgown and matching robe hanging on her door. She just purchased this set especially for her son. On her dresser, she placed new lacy white satin lingerie, bra, garter belt, panties, and black seam stockings, also purchased specifically for this purpose. She left fluffy, white mules on the floor. All these items were meant to be pleasing to both eyes and touch. She hoped Josh wouldn't be able to resist wearing them. Later that day, when Josh went to his mom's room to see what he would wear, he saw the negligee set and lingerie that appeared to be waiting for him. He was totally entranced, just as his mom had hoped. He knew his mom had nice clothes, but until today, he hadn't seen anything that looked this beautiful. When he touched both the negligee and the lingerie, Josh knew that Janet must wear them today. He gathered all the items, including the stockings and mules, and went to his room to change. It didn't take long to put on these luscious fashions. Once dressed, he returned to his mom's room for panties to fill his bra and to see his reflection, wearing the negligee. As he walked, he savored the feel of the satin nightgown and robe surrounding him, as well as the usual tautness of his stockings tugging against his garters. He felt wonderful, and that feeling intensified after he filled his bra and observed the pretty feminine young woman looking back at him from the mirror. Several of his chat friends had mentioned using a maxi pad in their panties, both for protection and to maintain a feminine appearance. He went to the bathroom and found his mom's box of maxi pads under the sink. Josh opened the package, removed the adhesive strip, and positioned the pad properly in his panties. It was a unique feeling walking with the pad between his legs. Josh returned to his room and immediately went to the online chat room. He could wait to tell anyone who asked what he was wearing. As he sat and moved in his chair, he savored the feel of the bra tight across his chest and the satin panties and negligee caressing his body. He became so absorbed in chatting with 2 others that he didn't hear his mom return home and enter the house. Elizabeth had taken a half day off to see if her thoughts about Josh and his behavior were correct. She took off her shoes and quietly made her way to Josh's room. Carefully, she looked in and saw her son clad in the satin negligee, clearly enjoying being dressed that way. Without being observed, she moved behind him and noticed both the screen name and the private chats that Janet was having. Before she could say anything, Josh noticed a slight movement behind him. He quickly turned around and saw his mom standing there with a big smile. His face reamed in embarrassment, and he wanted to hide. Josh lowered his head, looked at the floor, and felt the world was about to end as he waited for his mom's wrath. Instead, she quietly sat down on his bed and said how pretty he looked in the negligee. She mentioned she wished she could have seen Janet dressed in some of her other things, especially the gold cocktail dress. Mom asked if Janet was the name he'd chosen when dressed. All Josh could do was nod. Elizabeth commented that Janet was a very nice name and seemed to fit. She then asked if Janet liked wearing soft, silky clothes. At this point, Josh regained some speech and started stammering out an apology for dressing in her clothes, promising never to do it again. He hadn't gotten far into his halting statement when Mom took his hands gently and said she didn't have a problem with Josh or Janet dressing femininely. If this was what he wanted, it was fine with her. But Mom expressed concern that Janet had borrowed her clothes without permission. Elizabeth felt it would be more appropriate if Janet had her own wardrobe rather than continually borrowing from her closet. She said Janet could still borrow things whenever she liked. Josh was stunned to hear his mom say all this. He had expected her wrath and to be called every vile name. Instead, she was offering him the opportunity to be Janet and have her own clothes. With tears rolling down his cheeks, he looked up at his mom's smiling face and asked if she was serious. Elizabeth nodded and reached out to hug and comfort Janet. She stroked his hair while he quietly sobbed on her shoulder. When she felt him calming down, she reached for tissues so Josh could dry his eyes. She then asked if Josh would like to be Janet and dress full-time. He eagerly nodded, but asked how it could be done, especially with high school beginning in less than 2 weeks. Elizabeth said when she first found signs that Janet was getting into her things, she'd made some assumptions and inquiries. There was a private all-girls school nearby that accepted both regular students and specially attired students. She said Parkside High School, sometimes known as TGI High in the community due to the number of male students who dressed as members of the opposite sex, would accept Josh as a student, depending on his academic record. Elizabeth had seen that his record was provided to them in a timely manner and had completed the application process. All that was needed was for Josh's feminine name to be added, and acceptance was assured. Josh would be Janet every day and dressed daily in feminine apparel. She looked into his eyes and asked if this would be acceptable. Janet broke into a big smile and hugged her mom tightly. All she could say was, "Yes, yes, yes." Mom then asked if Janet would model the negligee for her. As Janet eagerly stood and turned around, Mom commented on how nice the items looked on her and said they were purchased especially for her and were the first items in Janet's new wardrobe. Janet, not hearing what her mom had just said, started to say these were her mom's when Elizabeth stopped her and again said she'd gotten them especially for Janet. This time, Janet realized what her mom was telling her. She beamed as she again threw her arms around Mom's neck in a big hug. Elizabeth asked if Janet would lift her negligee and let Mom see her panties, garters, and stockings. Janet quickly agreed and daintily lifted her negligee. Mom immediately noticed the feminine bulge in Janet's panties and asked if Janet was using a maxi pad. Janet blushed but assured her mom she was for protection and for keeping herself tucked in. Mom smiled at how smart her daughter was and promised there would always be a large supply of maxi pads available for both of them. Mom asked Janet if she'd selected a middle name since the school application required it. After a moment's thought, Janet asked her mom if she could use Elizabeth in her honor as a middle name. This almost caused Mom to begin crying. However, she controlled herself and gave Janet another big hug. Elizabeth then mentioned she'd been speaking to a female lawyer friend about quietly changing Janet's name from its masculine form to the feminine Janet Elizabeth and was assured it could be done quickly and quietly before school started. Mom then said she should go pick out an outfit for Janet so they could shop for the new wardrobe needed. She also suggested Janet should start hanging her new clothes in the spare room closet, which would soon be furnished properly for a teenage girl, including space for the computer, so Janet could continue with her chats. Elizabeth left the room briefly to get Janet a nice outfit to change into for their shopping trip. While she waited happily for her mom to return, Janet removed the negligee and mules and carefully placed them into her new closet. She felt like this was truly the first day of the rest of her new life. Although Elizabeth had shown Janet most of the basics of hair care and makeup, she felt a visit to a professional was in order for a new hairstyle for school. In confidence, she'd briefly mentioned to Linda, her longtime stylist and friend, about Josh becoming Janet. This was while Elizabeth was getting her hair done after the first shopping trip with Janet. She was hopeful Linda would be willing to do Janet's hair and makeup on the Saturday before school opened. Linda was more than willing, but suggested Janet come to her house on Sunday instead. She had a small salon set up in her basement for neighborhood customers, which she operated some evenings and Sundays. Linda felt Janet might be more comfortable getting her hair done for the first time there rather than in the crowded salon on Saturday. This way, Janet could relax and wouldn't feel intimidated or pressured. She could learn the step-by-step techniques needed for hair and makeup care. Linda even mentioned her daughter Megan might help. When Elizabeth looked questioningly at Linda about this, she was told that Megan was 2 years older than Janet and had shown no inclination toward boys or girls yet. She went on to point out that Megan attended Parkside not because of the dress code, but because she could get a good private school education as well as work on her future career as a hairstylist. Before Elizabeth left the salon that day, she confirmed the time of Janet's appointment with Linda. On Sunday morning, Janet awoke earlier than usual. The previous day, her mom had told her about her upcoming hair appointment with Linda and her daughter Megan. She was excited and eagerly looking forward to her first beauty salon experience, although unsure how a girl near her age would react to a boy in panties and a skirt. Elizabeth had said Janet would have a shampoo, hot oil conditioning, frosting, set, and manicure. Also, Linda would show Janet how to do her makeup and care for her skin and new hairstyle. The fact that Mom trusted Linda both as a hairstylist and as a confidant was important for Janet. She was also interested in seeing how Megan would behave toward her. She went into the bathroom carrying the pink satin bra, garter belt, and panties she would wear after her shower. She properly disposed of her maxi pad and then removed her satin nightgown and panties and put them in the laundry hamper. Since her first day as Janet, one of her chores in helping Mom around the house was emptying the hamper and sorting the laundry. Gradually, Mom hoped Janet would be able to do the laundry completely on her own. She was already hand-washing all their lingerie. Janet put her pink plastic shower cap over her hair and stepped into the hot shower. Mom had taught her how to shave what little body hair she had and how to use Depiley cream when necessary. As she washed, Janet delighted in the feel of her soft, hairless body. After the shower, she dried off using one of the big pink fluffy towels on the bath counter. She made sure to use scented bathtubs. When Mom had her first hints about Janet, she gone out and bought realistic B-sized breast forms. When her son said he wanted to dress and be her daughter, she surprised him with the breast forms to give him a proper feminine shape for a teenage girl his age. Mom felt Janet wouldn't look right or feel comfortable with her bra stuffed with panties day in and day out. Janet had been so appreciative from the very first day. Next, she put the garter belt around her waist. Finally, she put on the lacy satin panties and the requisite maxi pad. Janet always felt so feminine when she first put on her lingerie. Before returning to her room to finish dressing, she checked her appearance in the mirror. Satisfied with what she saw, she then checked her toenails to see if they needed touching up. The other night, while they were dressed in satin nightgowns before going to bed, Mom had helped her do her toenails in vibrant pink polish. Janet looked and saw her nails still looked as good as they did that night. Returning to what was Josh's room, as the spare room was awaiting new furniture to turn it into a femininely decorated room suitable for a teenage girl, Janet sat on the bed and picked up the taupe stocking she'd set out. Carefully, she drew the first one over her foot and upper leg. She stood briefly to attach the stocking top to the garters before sitting and repeating the process. She enjoyed feeling the tautness of the stockings and garter belt as she moved. Mom had said stockings and heels made Janet's legs look so nice and shapely. Janet put on the pink satin blouse she'd chosen. It had a high neckline with long full sleeves and resembled one worn by a mistress she'd seen online. Janet felt that if she could look half as beautiful as this woman, she would be quite feminine indeed. She put on a straight gray skirt that ended just above her knee. As she zipped up the back and buttoned the top button, she glanced at the skirt for any lint that might need removing. She smoothed the skirt over her hips and felt somewhat limited in her stride as she walked. Janet then put on her 2-inch heels that matched her skirt. As she was getting her hair and makeup done a little later, she knew she didn't have to take time now to do them. She sat savoring what she was wearing when Elizabeth called to her and asked if she was ready. Picking up her gray purse and putting the strap on her shoulder, Janet said she'd be right there. She tied a pink silk headscarf over her hair since Mom had said it should be covered until they got to Linda's. As she came to the entry foyer, Janet heard Elizabeth say how nice she looked and that she hoped Janet would enjoy her day of beauty. Janet smiled and said she was ready. They drove the short distance to Linda's house, a rancher in a nice development. Elizabeth pulled into the drive behind Linda's sedan. She looked at Janet and asked if she was ready. Janet smiled and nodded, though admitted to being a bit nervous. Elizabeth assured her she had nothing to be nervous about. After all, she was just getting her hair done. They walked to the door and rang the bell. In seconds, a pretty teenager dressed in a well-fitted pink uniform, stockings, and tennis shoes opened the door. Once inside, the teen introduced herself as Megan, Linda's daughter. She turned to Janet and told her how nice she looked and said she'd chosen a pretty outfit to wear. As she led them downstairs to the salon area, she asked Janet if she would be going to Parkside. When Janet said yes, Megan asked if she could be her big sister during her first year there and guide her through the unfamiliar passages of high school. Janet said she would be happy to have Megan as a big sister at school. As they entered the salon area, Linda greeted Elizabeth warmly and then turned to meet Janet. Her first comment was that Janet was certainly more feminine than many of the new girls she knew at Parkside. Janet blushed but accepted this compliment graciously. She then noticed Linda was dressed in the same manner as Megan, well-fitted pink uniform and all. When Janet asked about this, Linda replied that in her home salon, she tried to maintain the appearance and feel of 50s neighborhood salons, even though all the equipment and fixtures were fairly modern. Linda had Janet sit in her styling chair while she fastened a pink plastic shampoo cape around Janet's neck and draped it over her clothes. She then took her to the shampoo bowl and had Janet recline so her neck rested in the bowl's cutout. Having donned a pink plastic cobbler's apron over her uniform, Megan took her mom's place to do Janet's shampoo. After making sure the water was the proper temperature, she thoroughly wet Janet's hair and applied shampoo. She worked up a rich lather and massaged Janet's scalp in the process. Janet sighed audibly at how relaxing this was, which caused Megan to comment that many women found the shampoo as relaxing as Janet did. Rinsing the first lathering from the hair, Megan proceeded to repeat the process. Once the second shampooing was completed, Megan squeezed the excess water from Janet's hair and then wrapped a towel around her head and led her back to her mom's styling chair. Linda had also donned a pink plastic cobbler's apron and was waiting for Janet to return. She smiled at Janet and removed the towel covering her hair. She quickly applied conditioner and then placed a plastic conditioning cap over Janet's hair. Lastly, the heat cap was fitted snugly over the conditioning cap and the chin strap was fastened under Janet's chin. Once the heat cap was turned on, Janet felt the warmth it generated all over her head. While enjoying the nice effects of the heat cap, she had a chance to look at the decor of the salon. The walls were done in pastel colors in keeping with this feminine sanctuary. Against one wall were 3 hair dryers with plastic domes. The shampoo bowl was in one corner and Linda's styling station was against another wall. There was a second styling station set up right next to Linda's. Trays of rollers and perm rods were on carts between the 2 stations. 2 large cabinets were against another wall, one holding towels and the other holding various salon supplies. As she sat under the dryer and looked through the plastic dude hood, Janet realized that no matter how often she experienced it, she still savored all parts of the beauty salon event.